Let's ball. Let's go.
Get ready for Beyond the Arc, the show that eats, sleeps, and breathes the hardwood. Featuring two guys who know how to move on the court.
You got a defender in your way, you take him to the left, you take him back to the right, and he's falling back, and you just Jay right in his face. And then you look at him. And then you say what?
A couple of basketball junkies who shine the spotlight on everyone in the world of hoops.
I got game, she got game, we got game, they got game, he got game.
It's the coach, Bryan Fulford.
My entire adult life, I've never used the expression game face.
And the scout, Steve Barnhart from HardwoodHoopsCentral.com.
That boy's good.
Gentlemen, the court is yours.
Live from the 740 The Game studios in Orlando, Florida, you're listening to Beyond the Arc presented by TNT Elite Hoops on the iHeart Radio Network. My name is Bryan Fulford, and I'm joined by my partner in the backcourt, Steve Barnhart from HardwoodHoopsCentral.com. Steve, how you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm good, Coach. Coach, I'm really good. Hey, listen, what's your game face look like?
It's not. It doesn't sell for radio.
Very stoic.
It doesn't sell for radio.
Very
but
Greg Popovich like.
Right. Yes. Very nice. Very nice. Hey, you can interact with our show via our Facebook and Twitter pages. On Twitter, you can follow us at BTA Hoops on Twitter, and on Facebook, Beyond the Arc Podcast.
Hit those like buttons. Hit that follow button.
Like, follow. All right, so let's get right into this. The opening tip, and I've got to say, Steve, we've got to go right into what I just like to call maybe it's a historic moment for the NBA.
It's not maybe, it is.
Okay, I'm a little worried about.
Be bold in your word choice.
Okay, be bold. Okay, a historic moment for the NBA in which Becky Hammond, the first female assistant, full-time female assistant in the NBA for the San Antonio Spurs, also became the first female head coach for the Spurs during the Summer League and in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And she led the San Antonio Spurs to the championship of the Las Vegas Summer League. Yep. And, I'll admit, a year ago, I didn't know what to really think about it. I thought it was maybe a stunt, sort of a media thing. Hey, let's get us some extra attention.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, no, but you know what?
Uh-oh.
Seeing her coach, and actually doing some research. I was uninformed back then, but actually doing a little research on who Becky Hammond is.
Right.
You come to find out she's a very decorated professional basketball player first and foremost, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
She was a point guard, and we all know, what do they say about point guards?
An extension of the coach on the floor.
Right, and so under the tutelage of the great Greg Popovich,
right.
And I don't know what, we can go into another show about history and if there's that kind of validity to that whole thing. But for her to take this group of young men, young rookies, first and second year guys, young guys who are fighting for a spot, to be able to, who haven't spent a lot of time together, she was able to gather them together, get them to play on the same page, and they look great. I think they lost their first game. If I'm not mistaken.
I believe so.
It was a close game.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't lose another game the entire Summer League.
Right. Yeah, at the end of the day, look, it's a type of move that you would expect from the Spurs in terms of staying ahead of the curve. Setting the tone, setting the pace, and letting the rest of the league understand that we're going to be that franchise that is trying to make the move that's going to further us and keep our brand growing and keep teams and players wanting to come to our franchise, which is why you're able to see them reload and continue to be consistent. It's the find ways to continuously be consistent but always stay ahead of the curve. And that's the reason they've gone to the playoffs, the last 17 years. So, at the end of the day, that's what it is for them. They've found a way to be consistent all the way across the board.
And when you have news organizations like Forbes, Newsweek, LA Times, the Washington Post, the New York Post, BBC, CNN, those are the news agencies that are covering the Summer League. It's the Summer League. Who pays attention to the Summer League?
The attention is growing. So it's definitely not a situation where it's like and I'm not saying this to offend any NFL fans, but it's not like preseason football or preseason, baseball and all that. It's actually grown into its own separate entity.
So I applaud the NBA right now. I applaud the NBA, I applaud the Spurs organization, applaud those young men for embracing what Becky Hammond, was able to give them and try to teach them. And you're like, who is Becky Hammond? Okay, 16 years, a veteran in the WNBA. She played for New York for 8 years, played for San Antonio for another 8. Mm-hmm. She was a 6-time All-Star in that league, a 2-time All-First-Team player, 2-time All-Second-Team player. She was the assist leader 1 year. She's 6 seasons in which she led the league in free throw percentage with a career almost of 90%. Mm-hmm. She even played internationally.
Right.
And that's where most female basketball players make their money is internationally. It's not really here in the States. Mm-hmm. She was a world champion in Russia, a EuroLeague All-Star, very well credentialed as a player. And, I guess it all starts with a guy like Tony Parker. They say he was one of the first to kind of embrace her as sort of being just another basketball person, someone with a lot of knowledge and a love of the game. And then you got to applaud Greg Pop. Well, actually, she was a sponge, so give her the credit.
Right.
She was a sponge who kind of soaked up what was going on in the Spurs organization. I ask you, Steve, how soon do you think it'll be before we see Becky Hammonds leading an actual NBA organization?
I really don't know. It'd be one of those things for me where I don't know how progressive the league is just yet in that area. So I haven't been able to gauge and say, well, you know what, it'll be 5 years. It could be 10 years. You know what I mean? But, at the end of the day, let's say she continues to make this kind of headway, each year. Because the one thing where a lot of teams pick up their next head coach is from the bench. And if she's constantly putting the spotlight on herself by being the head coach of the summer league team and they're winning like this, then and then during the regular season, her impact and coaches talk. The basketball community is very small.
Right.
So at the end of the day, people understand that, when somebody's doing a really good job, the word gets out.
Right.
And you don't, and the fact the spotlight is on her, it makes it even, it magnifies it even more.
Here's my theory on how this will all play out. Obviously, right now she sits in the second row among the assistant coaches. Mm-hmm. And we've already heard LaMarcus Aldridge sort of say that Pop kind of gave him the indication that he'll be around for the 4 years of his contract,
right,
which I think will be the last 4 years Popovich coaches in the NBA. And I think there's a timetable here of being an assistant for 4 years in that organization. I could very well see in 5 years, 4 years' time, Becky Hammond becoming the head coach of the Spurs once Popovich leaves. That's my, I don't know. If someone doesn't try to throw money at her first, we've already heard some GMs sort of put that out there, but that's my running conspiracy to see how and what happens.
Or the impact that she's had in the WNBA and internationally, there might be teams in those areas that will reach out and try to get her.
Right. That would be an interesting concept to see whether she would leave the NBA to go that route just to sort of have that quote unquote head coaching experience, and then would anybody remember her to bring her back?
Well, if they're winning titles. If she goes in the WNBA and they're winning WNBA championships, or if she goes and plays.
That route hasn't worked out for guys like a Bill Laimbeer, who many people think probably is a deserving head coach in the NBA, but he's had great success in the WNBA.
Sometimes
Michael Cooper.
It comes down sometimes to who likes you.
Yeah.
Okay. If the right person sees a fit with you and what you can do for the ball club, and next thing you know, they're giving you a shot to interview.
All right. So while we're talking about Becky Hammonds and those Spurs in the Summer League, let's get into a little Vegas Summer League, as now it's over. So the Summer League is over. We can kind of get into looking at guys who impressed, guys who you expected to do well, guys who you didn't really know of going in. And let's just start with that Spurs team, because there are two guys on that team who I think made headlines. One would be Kyle Anderson, who, second-year player, turned out to be the MVP of the Vegas Summer League. Mm-hmm. And then there's Jonathan Simmons, who many unexpected, I guess is what you can say, right, was playing in the D-League, right, D-League this past year, mm-hmm, for the Austin Spurs, if I'm not mistaken. But he was actually the championship championship game MVP,
right?
End up picking up a 2-year contract. Mm-hmm. Talk about those two guys and what do you see and what could we see in their future with that organization?
Well, the Spurs are going to need wing depth this year, and so Jonathan Simmons, brings in a guy who can be athletic. He showed a lot of his athleticism playing above the rim, and of course, you see Kyle Anderson being a guy that has gotten comparisons to Boris Diaw throughout his young career, even coming out of UCLA. So, and he showed off that versatility that you get from a 6'9" guy who can handle the ball, who can post up, who can pass well out of the post, and do all the different things that he can do. As his shot comes along, he'll be even better. So Kyle Anderson's definitely a guy that's going to stick with that franchise because he fits their system very well. Jonathan Simmons will remain to see kind of how he develops. I think the defensive end is where athletic, and defense, that kind of goes hand in hand. And if you can bring those two together, you can get minutes playing, a strong defensive role, and then be, the athleticism on the offensive end and the ability to shoot because he shot the ball extremely well.
Yeah.
So those things will come to play. But I think if he can get the defensive end, that'll allow him to get the minutes. And then offensively, you can see what he can contribute. And that's what will continue to get him success.
The thing when I watch Kyle Anderson, and because it's not quick, I mean, he's 6'8", 6'9". Yeah. So there's nothing that he does which looks fast. He reminded me of Jalen Rose back in the day. If you remember Jalen Rose and sort of that movement which looked a little slow to the TV eye, but it was actually very very I can't skilled. It looked fluid,
right?
So I mean that's sort of what I saw from Kyle Anderson, deceptively smooth,
right?
Is what I might say.
For those guys, I always like to say that there's no movement that rarely is there a movement wasted. They understand where they're going to go with the basketball. They're going to make a smart play with it more often than not. They're not going to try to do too much because they understand their limitations.
And Simmons, every time I looked at Simmons, he was a highlight reel. I think you could probably put a highlight reel of everything he did in terms of he was always attacking the basket.
Right, that's his
in the air. That's his game. Right. I mean, I think he hit SportsCenter as the number 1 or 2 play at least 2 or 3 consecutive games.
Right, and he probably had at least 3 or 4 of the top 10 dunks at Summer League too.
Right. Okay, so let's go into maybe some other unexpected guys. We can kind of go to some of the guys that we expected, but some unexpected guys. And one of the names I'll throw at you, Scotty Wilbekin. We kind of mentioned him a little bit last week. Scotty Wilbekin, who played with the Sixers, actually, of course, from the Florida Gators, was a point guard, very heralded coming out of Florida, averaged 14.4 points a game, showed, at least by scouts and other observers' eyes, showed some good defensive skills, and he shot the ball extremely well from the three-point line, shooting 42%. Actually picked up a contract from the Sixers.
Right.
I mean,
he's a viable option. I mean, as he proved in college, he can score the ball, and as long as he can shoot the ball well, that'll be kind of where he'll get his niche. Now, defensively, of course, for a lot of guys, that's where they have to kind of pick up and get the speed of the game and pick up on that side of the floor. And I'll just say it plain and simple. As long as he keeps himself out of trouble, that's the other part of it. So, I can definitely see him at some point filling a role. Hopefully he can. I mean, the Sixers definitely were looking or have been looking for depth at the point guard position. And so, who knows? Maybe he can fill that.
He signed a 4-year deal with the Sixers, 2 of them guaranteed. But you brought up an interesting point as we were talking about him being with the Magic, actually, and on the Magic's payroll.
No, it wasn't him. I was talking about Seth Curry and Peyton Siva.
Okay.
And that was on their D-League team last year.
Okay, so let's transition over to Seth Curry, who picked up a lot of attention.
Yep.
I think led the league with about 25 points a game, ended up picking up a contract with Sacramento.
Yep.
Is he possibly an alternative in the future? Say Rondo doesn't work out, or is just Sacramento being? I feel like Sacramento is trolling the league a little bit and just a little crazy.
It's Sacramento, and the thing about it is, okay, Seth Curry showed he could score in the summer league, but did he particularly shoot the ball that well? Did he really show that he could get to the rim? And then for me, I look at like things like assist to turnover ratio, ability to be able to create for others, being able to set up the offense, and he had some turnover issues. Low assist rate, sometimes comparison to assist to turnover, they were about even in some games. So there were some questions there. I think he's definitely can be serviceable in the league. I mean, there are some things that you can grow on with him. He's played in the D League, and so he's had some of that professional experience. I mean, so it's not a situation where I don't know if he'll come in and be able to play better than Rondo or show that he's a better player than Rondo. But you never know. I mean, the chemistry of that team is going to be interesting to watch. And so at some point you may see Rondo go into the doghouse, because we know George Karl is more of an old school guy. Probably isn't going to play those games of kind of like what you saw with Rick Carlisle in Dallas.
Right.
If you get in my doghouse, we'll go somewhere else. So he might be able to get some minutes, and if he can, there will be an opportunity for him to really show what he can possibly do.
Who else off your list, maybe of unexpected guys? Give me another name that off your unexpected list that you might.
I wouldn't necessarily call them unexpected, but you know what, guys that that maybe nobody's really talking about a whole lot. Maybe NBA scouts are, obviously, but guys that players that are probably not getting a whole lot of pub media wise. I like the guy like Justin Anderson, played for Virginia. Was out with a bad hand injury last year, but averaged 17 and 4 and 1.2 steals per game. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well from three, but he'll adjust to that. And if people recall, in the ACC last year, he shot about 50% from the 3-point line, a little over 50% from the 3-point line. So he has really good athleticism, length, ability to be a 3-and-D guy, as we like to call it, a guy who can shoot the ball, shoot the three on one end and play really good defense for you on the other end, can guard multiple positions for you. I like just another guy that probably wouldn't get a lot of conversation. A guy like Norman Powell, shot 44% from the 3-point line in the D League, could be a really good defender, projected to be a pretty good defender, has a good body size on him. A former UCLA guy, could really score the ball, could really do some things for Toronto. And then last, before we head off to break, Jordan Mickey was a guy that really impressed a lot of people. 7'3" wingspan, undersized power forward type, but can finish around the rim really well, rebound for you, has a little bit of a face-up game, and he shot 52.6% from the field. So I think he'll be a second round gem for Boston, and Boston's had a knack of getting those second-round gem type of guys.
A couple other names to think about and to go look at. Allen Williams from the Rockets. We'll maybe talk about the Rockets coming up after the break.
Interesting fact about him, he led the NCAA last year with 11.8 rebounds. He led the D League this year with 11.8 rebounds. So let that be a lesson to all young guys. There's always a skill that translates at every level, and it's rebounding. All
right, coming up after the break, we get into a little of the offseason moves from a pair of Texas teams. You're listening to Beyond the Arc presented by TNT Elite Hoops on the iHeart Radio Network.
Welcome back to the show that eats, sleeps, and breathes the hardwood. Beyond the Arc, presented by TNT Elite Hoops.
What are you doing?
I'm doing two things.
What?
I'm making them mad. Most guys don't play good when they're mad.
Basketball. Look, you're embarrassing me. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing I'm doing.
I only have 4 words for you. White men can't jump.
Welcome back to Beyond the Arc, presented by TNT Elite Hoops on the iHeart Radio Network. Brian Fulford, joined by my man Steve Barnhart from Hardwood Hoop Central. Steve, you might disagree with that little statement there.
What? Oh, I definitely can't jump, but you know what? Half of Blake Griffin is mad right now.
Bam, because he can get up.
Yeah.
You can interact with the show via our Facebook and Twitter pages at BTA Hoops on Twitter and Beyond the Arc Podcast on Facebook. You can also send us an email. I found the email address.
Nice.
One of our little. If you download and listen to our podcast over on blogtalkradio.com/Beyond the Arc. Our Gmail is btapodcast@gmail.com.
And you forgot that.
Really? Look, do I use it enough? I do check it though. So send us an email.
That's encouraging to the people who are going to email us.
Yeah, this Twitter, Facebook, tweet, follow, like. All right, so Steve, let's get into some off-season moves. And I think what's interesting, 2 teams in the state of Texas making some very interesting moves. Of course, we sort of knew 2 weeks ago through the free agency signing of LaMarcus Aldridge, David West, of what San Antonio was doing to increase their chances of making maybe one last run at an NBA championship with the big three of Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker. But how about the Houston Rockets making a trade this past week for Ty Lawson, who recently was arrested for
his second
DUI in what, maybe 6 months, I think, or
something like that.
Whatever. Yeah. It's too many.
Relatively close together.
Yeah, too close. And so the Rockets sort of, make the move to go and get rid of basically some bench guys, about 4 bench guys on the end of the bench. Right. I won't read the names because none of them really played significant time, and I don't know. Anybody on there you want to significantly point out?
Not really.
Okay, keep it moving. So Ty Lawson ends up going to Houston, and of course they had Patrick Beverley already, and many people felt like his injury or him not being available in the playoffs, especially the Western Conference Finals, might have been that one missing piece that the Rockets could have used. What do you possibly?
I mean, listen, the Rockets' biggest issue is they're constantly fluctuating in how good of a defensive team they want to be. And notice I say want to be because it definitely is a mentality thing for them because they've got enough pieces there to be a good defensive team. People say what they want about James Harden. I mean, he's bad, but he's not the worst two-guard defender in the league. And then you look at the rest of the team. Ariz is capable. Dwight Howard's more than capable. I mean, they shouldn't be as up and down as they are. But the bottom line is Patrick Beverley does help on that end of the floor. But offensively, while he is a solid three-point shooter, you look at the team offensively. How many guys can create off the dribble not named James Harden? Nobody. So they need someone on that end of the floor that can kind of take some of the pressure off James Harden to be able to create off the dribble or at least, drive and kick or do some of the other things so that James Harden's not necessarily playing with the ball constantly in his hands and looking to create, take contact. I mean, all that contact he takes, while it looks great on the stat sheet, it takes a toll. And, he's still young, but after a while, all that young stuff is going to go out the window. So somebody's got to be able to step in and take some of that pressure off him and be able to take some of that contact, be able to do some of the things that he's capable of doing, and at least just be able to make some plays for the team and not necessarily rely so heavily on him.
I'll tell you what, if you don't know who Houston's general manager is, Daryl Morey, he has made some very interesting moves over the past couple of years, and I applaud him for doing, at least sticking to his sort of plan and the way he operates, maybe taking chances on guys based on their skill set, and maybe it might be a little quirky. Guys like Josh Smith, Jeremy Lin, Omar Asik, guys that when he brought him in, people kind of questioned, well, why would you bring that guy in? And actually, those guys were actually, on paper, pretty productive basketball players, numbers-wise, in the way that Houston kind of plays it. And so now you bring in a Ty Lawson into a group that, when you look at this group and their age, this group is actually in their prime. And, we can talk about the young guys and guys who are under 24 because I think there's a segment of teams with a lot of players that everyone kind of looks at maybe in future terms, under 24. We've talked about this on our podcast. I think Golden State is sort of that anomaly where you had 4 guys with that few experience. What's the stat? 4 guys with that kind of time in a game, their average amount of time that they play,
right,
being that young and making that kind of significance in winning a championship. That hasn't been done in almost 20 years.
Well, I mean, it's possible for them to do that because of their style of play. You need those guys to be able to do what they do in order for that style of play to work. So that's more or less, that's why it's an anomaly, because they fit that system to a T because of what it is. And the fact of the matter is, when Kerr came in, he basically took the lid off the offense and said, I'm going to let you guys do what you can do, and I'm going to expand the playbook. And so these guys are now able to go out and do exactly what their skill set calls for, and you're able to kind of build around that as an offense. So that's why it does look like an anomaly, but in reality, it's basically what that team is and what they're capable of.
Well, so here's what you've got. Here's this group of guys you've got for Houston. You've got 2 point guards in Ty Lawson and Patrick Beverly, both 27 years old, definitely in their prime. You've got an MVP candidate in James Harden, just 26 years old. You've got a Trevor Ariza, an NBA champion, with the Lakers, a good defender, just 30, also backed up by Corey Brewer,
right?
Significant with his impact and time that he gives off the bench, especially of late. He's only 29. Terrence Jones, 24 years old.
Right.
A guy that a lot of people maybe don't know, but if you're in fantasy basketball circles, you know, Donatas Montejunas.
Right.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
25.
Far be it for me to tell you if you pronounced it right, but it sounded right.
Sounded right. 25 years old. A significant post presence. Of course, you got Dwight. Dwight's only 30. Might seem old, but if he's healthy, and then you got young guys. You got a KJ McDaniels that they just picked up, a second-year guy, and he's got an interesting story in terms of his contract that he just signed. Montrezl Harrell, 21. Sam Decker, they just drafted.
Right.
Sam Decker, I think he's a good ball player, but he may not even hit the floor this year.
Yeah, I don't know if he will.
So I mean,
you got to remember what position he plays. He plays small forward.
Right.
So you really got
to Brewer, he and McDaniels have to fight to get on the floor.
Well, and not even that, but you really have to be ready to play at that position. And I'm not just talking about offensively, because Decker has a lot of things he can do for you offensively, but in the NBA, it might not be right away. And then defensively, you definitely have to be ready to go. So that's more or less why he's probably not going to see the floor, just because he's not quite there yet. But at the same point in time, as you pointed out, the depth chart doesn't call for it either.
So if I asked you, did the Rockets have a better offseason than the Spurs, you would say what?
I would say no, not necessarily. But it doesn't mean that Houston had that. It's not like the drop off is that significant. I would say at the end of the day, the Rockets needed a playmaker. They needed a point guard who could do something off the dribble and not put the ball in James Harden's hands so much, as I said earlier. On the flip side, if you look at what San Antonio did, and we talked about this at length last night, but before we started really planning out the show, we said that and the one thing that's been pointed out by plenty of people at this point, by re-signing all the guys they needed to re-sign, they lost a lot of depth. So on one end, you can say, okay, they've brought in guys for the future and signed guys that could have demanded bigger contracts and locked them in, which is great. And on the flip side, you can say they lost a lot of their depth, which is what has gotten them so far into the playoffs, because they do reach a point where some of their older veterans, they get a lot of these DNPs, and you need their bench to come in and actually be more productive than most. I mean, if you look at San Antonio, their bench, at least over the years, has been asked to be more than just a bench. I mean, they have to come in and really play a kind of a starring role, if you will, to a certain degree, and really pick up some things, because at the end of the day, we know Pop is going to limit minutes and really watch and see what these guys do. So personally, I like what the Rockets have done to address some of the things that they need, but at the end of the day, I'm not sold on them defensively. So it's hard for me to sit there and really give them a push and say, well, they had a better offseason. And then when people hear that, they automatically think, well, that's going to translate into the regular season and postseason, and that's not necessarily the case.
If there's an interesting article, and I'm just going to throw this out there for the sake of putting it out there. We don't have a lot of time. Maybe podcasts we might get a chance to talk about it, but I wanted to move to sort of the win shares stuff that we saw. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting article on a website called nyloncalculus.com. The writer, Seth Partnow, wrote an article a couple of days ago, and the headline says, "Do the pieces fit? Let's not crown the San Antonio Spurs prematurely." And just to summarize what his article, he brings up the fact that LaMarcus Aldridge, while he offensively, people gush about his addition, right, this article kind of brings up the whole notion of the rim protector and the defensive numbers that sort of play against LaMarcus Aldridge as a power forward / center.
Right.
And the fact that the Spurs, in losing Thiago Splitter
and Aaron Baines,
and it may sound wild to even go there, but
right, because people are still remembering the LeBron dunk in the finals.
Right. So the fact that bringing on a Aldridge and a David West and losing a Tiago Splitter and Aaron Baines, that actually San Antonio might not be better defensively and might be a little worse off. You go read the article. It's nyloncalculus.com. Look for it. Do the pieces fit? Let's not crown the San Antonio Spurs prematurely. And let us know, Facebook, Twitter, what you kind of thought. And just one of those things, maybe we can find Seth and get him on, because I'm curious about that notion. All right, so, Steve, you sent me this link, and if we can already – it's what day is it? July something, almost the end of the July. July 20 yeah. What's that, 3rd?
Too early to make these kind of predictions.
And exactly. So already on SI, they are projecting the standings for the 15-16 season using win shares.
Right.
Steve, I'm not going to call you an analytics guy.
Nope.
When you hear win shares, what is your take on that concept of win shares?
The concept of win shares is essentially, what each guy adds to the team in terms of, if he's on the floor and he's able to play, how many wins does he add to your ball club on an 82-game schedule? So, you look at it and you say, okay, well, this team lost these guys, this team added these guys, and they come up with this formula that essentially comes up with what their projected record would be.
So let's a couple of ones that I found interesting. First off, we can go to Oklahoma City. 45-37 record last year, didn't make the playoffs. But because of the fact that you've got a full season potentially of Kevin Durant, you've got your Enes Kanter, DJ Augustin, and Kyle Singler, it actually projects out that Oklahoma City finishes with a record of 60-22, but and actually, according to this, in win share,
puts them at what, third or something?
Puts them at third in the West, behind Golden State at 63 and the Clippers at 61.
And I can't argue with that. I can't not say for sure. First of all, you got to remember Oklahoma City is bringing in a brand new coach, so you got to kind of see how that all is going to kind of play out. At the end of the day, you kind of look at it and say, okay, all the pieces are coming back for Oklahoma City, but how convinced are you that these guys are going to be the Western Conference Final champions, or even be guys a team that can be in the Western Conference Finals? It kind of remains to be seen.
If you're hearing us and you're kind of like, win shares, what are you guys talking about? Look, this is what this, and there's a great line in this article. And it says, quote, a team's collective win shares doesn't always exactly add up to its actual win total, but it's usually quite close. Since the 62-63 season, the average margin of error is 2.74 wins.
Okay.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk about a couple of the young teams that are listed on this win share, and then we get into an NBA team that's planning on bringing a new flavor to the term throwback jersey. You're listening to Beyond the Arc, presented by TNT Elite Hoops on the iHeart Radio Network.
Welcome back to the show featuring two hoops junkies who need to work on their free throws. Beyond the Arc, presented by TNT Elite Hoops. Visit TNTEliteHoops.com to make your hoops game better today.
Welcome back to Beyond the Arc, presented by TNT Elite Hoops, live on 740 The Game and the iHeart Radio Network. We're in the final quarter of this show, and we teased it a little bit, talking about a couple of young teams, young up-and-coming teams that I think, as we were kind of looking through some things, two teams that, they're probably playoff contenders.
One of them definitely
One
is.
of them is and went to the playoffs last year. It's the Boston Celtics.
Right.
But a team that, after really looking at their roster and what they've got and how they finished last year,
right,
it'll be interesting to see, can they move into the playoffs?
Right.
And that's the Utah Jazz.
Right. Yeah, let's go with Boston first. The thing about Boston is they're really still trying to fill out their roster. I mean, right now they've got 16 guys who are signed to that team, and of course, going into the season, you can only have a certain number, and it's not 16, it's 12. So
right.
they're gonna have to figure some things out. But we were talking about the win share earlier, and the win share, at least according to SI, had them at +7 for going into the next year, which, if based on last year's playoff standings, would bump them from 7th to 5th, which in the Eastern Conference, that's a much favorable spot playing the 4th-seeded team as opposed to the 2nd-seeded team.
And according to this, it's the Hawks, so that's a win first round. I mean, the Hawks, they like to lay down in the playoffs. I'm just saying. Go ahead.
I mean, they didn't lay down last year.
Oh, they laid down.
They laid down.
Go ahead, continue.
Anyways, but anyhow, they have additions in terms of Amir Johnson.
Like?
David Lee. They re-signed Jay Crowder, was more of an energy guy for them. But I like their draft picks. A lot of people aren't really sold just yet on Terry Rozier or R.J. Hunter. But R.J. Hunter's got a lot of range and eventually will be a three-point specialist in the NBA. Terry Rozier is a tough physical guard who can, once he kind of learns the NBA game and kind of figures out a way to kind of get himself acclimated to the NBA game, I think he could be a solid backup in the NBA.
I didn't even have those guys. You know what? I was going through that. I didn't even have those guys even on my list. But it's a young team. I mean, guys like Bradley, Turner, fifth-year guys. This is the year where those guys either find a home or get shipped off somewhere, maybe get traded. Avery Bradley has been I don't think Avery Bradley's going anywhere. You can't just let a guy – he's kind of like their Tony Allen. I was going to say that. He's become sort of that defensive – except he can shoot. Yeah, he's become a defensive guy that Boston fans love, and they appreciate Bradley a lot. I think Evan Turner is on a make-or-break year for his future to see what he can do. But I'm interested to see what that post-triumvirate of Jared Sullinger, Kelly Olynyk, and a Tyler Zeller does now that they went and got veterans like a David Lee and Amir Johnson. Right. It's interesting. They're gonna, like I said, they're gonna have to figure out their front court for sure because it's loaded right now. But I definitely think it's not a bad problem to have given their roster. So they'll definitely figure out a way to do it. And the good thing is, for some of the guys that they can let go of, a lot of them they can just eat the salary for that particular player and not have a whole lot of effect on their on the tax line that comes with the NBA salary cap. So I think they're going to be good enough to, one, make the playoffs, but then two, I think they can make a move. Jumping over to the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference, here's a team that has not made the playoffs in the last 3 seasons. This past season was pretty interesting, right? Because prior to January 1, they ranked 27th in the defensive rating category. After January 1, this team found themselves, and they climbed to basically have the second best defensive rating in the league. They went from an 11-21 start to finishing the year 27-23, and a lot of that can be credited to Rudy Gobert, who finished his second year, right? And actually, it's a 2013 first-round draft pick. Actually went from a bench, where he only played about 45 games his first year, to actually, getting more significant time to becoming a starter. Mm-hmm. And in a starter's role, averaging 10 points, just under 11, 12 rebounds, about 3 blocks a game. It was a little over 2, actually. But put it like this. He's got a wingspan that's out of this world. He might be able to touch where you're sitting, or he can definitely touch from where you're sitting and where I'm sitting. With his arms out, he's got almost a 7'9" wingspan. Yeah. A guy like that with his athleticism and ability to protect the rim, in today's game, it's priceless. And this is a guy who, this is a team that when I look at their entire roster, they are littered with first-rounders from 2010 to 2015. Of course, you've got a Gordon Hayward from 2010, Alec Burks from 2011, Derek Favors from 2010 as well. Those sort of being your 3 young leaders. And then, you mentioned Gobert, Exum, Trey Burke, Rodney Hood, Trey Lyles, Trevor Booker. When I look at a group of first-rounders and seeing what they did, this is an interesting group. I have a love for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Right. But I might really pay more attention to the Jazz this upcoming year. And why is that?
Because I converted you. Because let's be honest, you were going to pay attention to the Timberwolves prior to me talking to you.
It's better than what you tried to get me to do last year, which was fall in love with the Toronto Raptors, and that didn't work.
Hey, listen.
All right,
That's Toronto's fault.
Okay. Let's get into some news nuggets before we get out of here. The NBA, some new options for the NBA League Pass, Steve. Of course, the 15-16 season, you can get the whole season for $199.99. What's interesting, though, if you want to just get a single team pass, $119.99, basically $120.
Right.
That averages out in an 82-game season to $1.46 for 82 games.
Okay.
And I can see all my Pacer games for $1.46. That's a great deal.
Right.
An even better deal, the single game option, $6.99,
which is brand new to this year.
Do you actually think fans might go for the single game option? I
mean, for the ones that just want to see, because at the end of the day, you got the national schedule, and if you don't particularly care to watch the games that are on ESPN or TNT, then you have the option to kind of do that on demand kind of thing, and buy a game that you want to watch. So it is a unique perspective. It is a little expensive. But, at the end of the day, how that whole thing plays out is the more games you buy, the less you spend per game. And if you don't buy as many games, you pay more per game. So that's kind of how it goes.
The NBA Players Association had their inaugural awards this past weekend. It aired on BET the other day. The players chose their MVP, and he was not Seth Curry. He was James Harden of the Houston Rockets. They also decided on a better defender than Kawhi Leonard, and it happened to be DeAndre Jordan. Some of the other categories in these first ever NBA PA awards, you had Man of the Year, Hardest to Guard, which was Seth Curry, Clutch Performer Seth Curry. Love some of these categories here, Steve. Coach you most want to play for. Who do you think got that, of course?
Of course, Greg Popovich.
Greg Popovich got that. You had the Game Changer honoree of the inaugural award, one Mr. Allen Iverson.
But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice?
And, of course, the Oscar Robertson Visionary Award goes to Chris Paul of the Clippers. Best home court advantage, Steve?
That would go to Oracle Arena. And honestly, in my humble opinion, that's the only true home court advantage of any team in the NBA.
I agree 100% with you. 100%.
When you have an opposing coach complaining that it's illegal, that was so bad on
Poor
Monty.
Monty. Bad luck. And then, of course, the best category of all. This is like from out of magazine. Player you secretly wish was on your team, and you know who got that award.
Right.
One LeBron James.
And the funny thing about it is, as public as free agency is now, I'm surprised that secretly is the very first word of that category.
Now, I'll tell you what's interesting about these awards. These awards, unlike the ones that are voted on by the media, hated on. And media, sports talking heads hated the fact that this came out. Why? Because they didn't vote on it. But I'm telling you what, under the leadership of Michelle Roberts, watch the NBA PA start to do more things. You already see the separation. I don't think this would have happened under former Chief Billy Hunter or his number 2 guy, Derek Fisher.
Right.
This wouldn't have happened under their regime.
No, definitely not. They were more corporate guys.
So definitely interesting there with the NBA PA. One final note before we break out of here. The Pacers are choosing to recognize the 30th anniversary of Hoosiers by wearing hickory jerseys. Not jerseys representing the 1954 Milan Indians or the 55-56 Crispus Attucks Tigers, but a fictional team.
That doesn't exist at all.
I want to rant so much.